One day, a letter arrived from Kenny. Inside, there was a signed divorce form and a photo of a child. I immediately realized it was Kenny's secret child. Sending a photo of his secret child to his wife, even in this manner, was truly a foolish thing to do.
Mom, you did it.
Yep, I filed it right away. I quickly signed the divorce form and went to the town hall with Tom to submit it in 10 seconds. Now, we're strangers. Let him fall to hell for all I care. Tom nodded vigorously at my sharp words, which sounded nothing like a parent. I went home and started packing. I was heading to my parents' house where my mother lives. The Kenny I once admired was long gone. My name is Rachel Harris, a 36-year-old housewife. I live with my husband, Kenny, and our son Tom, who is in elementary school. Kenny was my high school classmate, and we reconnected at a reunion 12 years ago. We didn't talk much back in high school, but I had always been aware of his presence. Kenny was a prominent figure at school, always at the top of the social hierarchy. I, on the other hand, was quiet, modest, and inconspicuous. Our worlds seemed completely different. However, I secretly admired him. The reunion was held when I had graduated from university and was starting to get used to working life. Normally, someone as ordinary as me would never get an invitation to a reunion. But since it was organized by Mary, who I had become a bit friendly with, I received the invitation. At that time, I had a faint hope that I might meet Kenny again. On the day of the reunion, I immediately spotted Kenny. He was just as dazzling as before, and I remember not being able to look him straight in the eye. I thought it would be a great accomplishment just to speak with him, but to my surprise, Kenny came over to our table.
Oh, it's Rachel, right? You look so much more polished, I almost didn't recognize you.
Kenny said, smiling at me. The face of the person I had once admired from afar was now right in front of me. That alone made me feel like I was floating in the sky. Mary, who knew I had admired Kenny, kindly set things up so that we could talk alone. While everyone else was enjoying the reunion, I was chatting with Kenny at the counter. To my surprise, Kenny knew about me from back then.
You know, Rachel, you always seemed like a rich girl with a big house. I felt like someone like me couldn't compare. By the way, how are your parents?
At that time, my father was in and out of the hospital due to a chronic illness, and both my mother and I were constantly worried about him. When I told him, Kenny's face showed great concern.
I'm so sorry to hear that. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know,
He said, gently patting my head. Just being able to talk to Kenny was a dream come true, but his kindness nearly brought me to tears. After the reunion, Kenny contacted me through Mary, and we began meeting up. Despite being teased by Mary, we went on many dates. I was amazed by Kenny's communication skills, and he quickly became close to my family, even treating my bedridden father like his real father. Kenny's parents were overseas, so he couldn't see them often. That's why Kenny also looked up to my father as if he were his own real father. Before long, we decided to get married, and the following year, our son Tom was born. I was so happy that my father, still in good health, could meet his grandson. How many people in the world get to marry their first love? I felt an incredible sense of happiness that I was able to marry Kenny, the only man I had ever loved.
Rachel, give me half of your life.
That was Kenny's proposal to me. Kenny was, as he had said, trying to take half of my life.
Rachel, long time no see. How have you been? Are you getting along with Kenny?
I received a call from Mary after several years. We had kept in touch for a while after I married Kenny, but once Mary moved to another state for work, we lost contact. Pretty well. My son is in 6th grade now. When I told her this, Mary let out a small sigh of relief on the other end of the phone.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I was a little worried. Even though you admired Kenny in high school, I wondered if I had forced you two together. Actually, the reunion was something I organized at Kenny's request. He said, "I want to see Rachel," and I got excited about it too.
Mary's words shook me a little. I had never heard that before.
But if you're getting along well, I'm relieved. Let's have dinner together sometime.
After hanging up the phone, I briefly reflected on those times. It had been 12 years since I reunited with Kenny, and I could feel how quickly time had passed. Tom, the son I had with Kenny back then, was already 11 years old. I told Mary that everything was fine, but my feelings toward Kenny had changed a lot since then. After getting married, Kenny has not changed at all from his high school days, in a bad way. When I first reunited with him and we started meeting up, it felt like a dream come true. Because of my quiet and unassuming personality, I had never really dated anyone, and my life revolved around Kenny. Kenny, who must have been incredibly popular back in school, was extremely self-centered and spoiled. He had been kind before we got married, but after marriage, Kenny became like a king. They say, "Don't feed the fish you've caught," and it was true in our case.
I'm the head of this house, so whatever I say goes. That's what marriage is all about.
Kenny always said this with a triumphant expression. I felt like I had seen this kind of behavior before, even in high school. Kenny, who was always at the top of the social hierarchy, walked around the school with a group of followers. Back then, I admired him, but now I understand that it looked cool only because we were students. However, with my lack of experience with men, I ended up accepting Kenny's selfishness without question. Even after Tom was born, Kenny didn't help at all with raising him. Naturally, Tom didn't warm up to Kenny. Kenny, who was often absent from home because of work, seemed to Tom like the man who occasionally comes by the house. When Kenny tried to hold him, Tom would cry loudly and cling to me.
What an annoying kid.
After that, Kenny showed no interest in Tom and never participated in events like sports days or school visits.
Who do you care about more, me or that kid?
If I couldn't meet Kenny's demands on weekends because of Tom's events, he would throw a tantrum like this. The solution when things got difficult was money.
Give me $300. I'll stay home and watch the house or whatever.
Kenny knew I couldn't miss Tom's events, so he would ask for money. Reluctantly, I had no choice but to give him the $300 to make it stop. Of course, after the events, Kenny was never home to look after the house. I would find out he had gone drinking since midday and wouldn't come back until the next morning. If I complained, he would just throw another tantrum, so I ignored it. And Kenny, who couldn't be satisfied unless everything went his way, couldn't hold on to a job for long. When we got married, he happened to be working for a major company. But because he was in sales, when things didn't go well, he would immediately blame others and cause a scene. His boss and coworkers couldn't deal with him, and after just 2 months, he quit the company. After that, he bounced from job to job and never had a steady job.
I'm just looking for a job that can maximize my value.
He constantly called it his resting period, and, of course, never contributed anything to household expenses. For Kenny, the last 12 years must have been quite comfortable. Whether he worked or not, he always had a place to stay, and if he worked, all the money he earned went straight into his pocket. Meals automatically appear, and when he runs out of money, he just asks me for more. I could only sigh at how far this life was from what I had imagined marriage to be. There's one more thing I don't understand about Kenny's behavior. He seems overly concerned about my father's health.
How's your dad doing? When's his next hospitalization?
It doesn't sound like he's asking out of concern, but more like he's hoping my father's condition worsens. Though my father has been in and out of the hospital, it seems the treatments are working, and even after over 10 years since his first hospitalization, he's still relatively healthy. There are even times when he's well enough to visit his own company. When I told him my father was healthy enough to stay home, Kenny replied with obvious disinterest.
Let me know if his condition gets worse.
My father, John, adores Kenny. Before we got married, Kenny often visited my father, trying to return the affection. But after we got married, Kenny only seemed interested in my father's health and hardly visited my family anymore. Still, there are times when he boasts.
I'm like a son to your dad, right? I consider him my real father. No doubt about it.
I can't help but shake my head at his strange words. That night, to my surprise, Kenny was home. And he was annoyingly in a great mood. Before I could ask what happened, Kenny spoke first.
I got a job. I'm starting a transfer tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Are you going to be working away? It made more sense to think of it like that because Kenny's sudden announcement really surprised me. But Kenny spoke to me with an air of confidence.
My job is none of your business, so don't pry. Anyway, I'll come back sometimes to check on your dad. Just make sure to wire me the living expenses every month.
Why do I need to send him money when he's going to work? Without even noticing the confusion on my face, Kenny started packing. Then, the next morning, he left the house before I woke up. I had been constantly dragged around by Kenny, but this time, I felt truly downhearted. However, at the same time, part of me felt a bit lighter now that Kenny had left the house. As I slumped on the living room couch, Tom came in and said,
Mom, you can divorce Dad now, right? I'll stay with you.
To make an 11-year-old say something like that is the mark of a bad mother. I hugged Tom and said, "It's okay." But I knew I had to think about the future for Tom's sake. I have to pull myself together. I reminded myself.
By the way, I heard Kenny visited John in the hospital recently.
It was something my mother told me one day. My father's condition had worsened recently, and he had been hospitalized again for what felt like the umpteenth time. Thinking this might be the end, I told Kenny, who was working away, about it. Afterward, Kenny made an utterly inappropriate comment.
Seriously? Good job, John. That's awesome.
He probably went to see my father after that phone call. Since it was a time when neither my mother nor I were with him, I never saw Kenny.
And you know what? John said, I'm handing the company over to Kenny. He'll inherit my fortune.
When my mother said this, I was taken aback. Wait, but his fortune is.
Yeah, but Kenny agreed to it.
When Kenny visited my father, what kind of conversation did they have? Apparently, my father told Kenny he would inherit his fortune. Did Kenny pressure my father into writing a will? I could only speculate, but after that, I couldn't get in touch with Kenny despite trying to contact him. I told him to send me a message, and this was the reply I got.
Call me when your dad passes. Until then, don't call or email me.
At that moment, my suspicions turned into certainty. Kenny had married me from the beginning to get his hands on my father's company and assets. He had been living off me, leeching for years, just for this. What a foolish man. Just as Kenny had said, I decided not to contact him until there was an emergency. About 2 months later, my father passed away in the hospital. Kenny didn't show up to the wake or the funeral. However, when I sent him a message saying, "We're opening Dad's will," he eagerly showed up. At the family court, relatives and lawyers gathered for the reading of the will. Kenny sat there with a smirk, holding a recording device.
It's for evidence in case anything happens, so you all can't complain later.
I could tell my relatives were repelled by his attitude. My mother, especially, had become stone-faced, her expression like a mask. Then, the contents of the will were read to us. In that instant, the tactless Kenny made a huge fist pump of victory. The will stated, the company owned by John and all other assets will be inherited by Kenny. Kenny let out a triumphant shout into the recording device. Kenny, listen, this is important, I said, but Kenny didn't listen at all.
Shut up. I don't care what you have to say. Your dad's assets are mine. I've got it all on tape. I have proof. Don't complain later. Your dad chose me as the heir, not you. Understand this seriously. Take that.
I had already informed my relatives about Kenny's personality. I warned them that he was extremely unreasonable and might upset them. Despite the warning, my relatives couldn't hide their discomfort with Kenny.
Kenny, listen to us.
Kenny also rebelled against my mother's words.
Sorry, but you can't inherit anything. The company is mine now. I'm the CEO, so don't get involved.
Despite repeated warnings from us, including the lawyer, Kenny stormed out. Left behind, all we could do was stare in disbelief. After that, I tried reaching out to Kenny many times, but he never responded. The only time he replied was when I said, I need you to meet with the lawyer about the inheritance procedure. Otherwise, he completely shut me out, refusing to listen to anything I said. My relatives kept urging me to divorce that man, but I had decided to wait until the right moment came. Divorcing just like that would play right into Kenny's hands. I bided my time, patiently waiting with Tom for the right moment. Then, one day, a letter from Kenny arrived. Inside were a signed divorce form and a photo of a child. I immediately recognized it as Kenny's secret child. In the second photo, Kenny was holding the child along with a woman who seemed to be the child's mother. The attached note read, "I'm going to be happy." To send a photo of his secret child and mistress to his wife in such a manner is truly a foolish act.
Mom, you did it.
Yep, I'm submitting it right away. I quickly signed the divorce papers and, with Tom, submitted them to the town hall in 10 seconds. When I called my mother to let her know, she and the rest of the family were overjoyed. Now, we're strangers. Let him fall to hell for all I care. My harsh words, which seemed unfit for a mother, made Tom nod deeply. I went home and started packing. I was heading to my parents' house. The Kenny I once admired had long since disappeared. There are things that are beautiful because they don't change, and there are foolish things that can't change. Kenny, you are definitely the latter. Living your life, always thinking you're the center of the world, is painful to watch. I now realize that I was a fool for getting carried away thinking I could marry you. But I'm changing. For Tom's sake. From the start, there was no love in our marriage. I am truly glad I realized all of this before I reached the halfway point in life. Please take care of the fortune my father left to you. After all, you inherited everything. Thank you. After my father passed away and the memorial service was over, the vice president of my father's company came to visit my family's house. He told me about Kenny's behavior.
John had mentioned this before, that your husband would be taking over as CEO. I was skeptical at first, but he actually came to the company.
Kenny, who had initially been eager, quickly grew bored with being the CEO. He stopped coming to the company within 2 weeks. The vice president had called him repeatedly, but Kenny kept making excuses to avoid coming in. When he finally showed up, he was playing video games in the CEO's office.
Well, I had been considering quitting before John passed. It seems that part-timers and employees are all quitting, but the necessary handovers have been made so that our clients won't be affected.
I was impressed by the vice president's thorough handling of things. It must have been tough taking care of Kenny, who appeared so suddenly.
Of course, I told Kenny as well. He said, "That's perfect. I'll start over and build the company from scratch." And then he told me to leave. So, I resigned yesterday.
My father's company had already been in serious decline. To put it bluntly, it was a company my father started out of personal interest. The vice president had worked for my mother's company, but he had helped my father when he started his own company. Now that Kenny had taken over my father's company, he would simply return to work at my mother's company. The part-timers and other employees who left the company would be welcomed back to my mother's business if they were willing. My family's house was quite large, even by local standards, with an air of old wealth. But none of that wealth came from my father's assets. My mother's side of the family had been the wealthy ones. The inheritance my mother received from her grandmother made our house large. And my mother herself was running a successful business. Her company was performing well and was expected to make a significant profit this year. Kenny seemed to think my father was rich, but my father had almost no assets. He had tried running a business but lacked the talent, and the company had been in the red for a long time. Whether as an individual or a corporation, all that remained were debts. I tried to explain this to Kenny, but he wouldn't listen. When the lawyer finally met with him, we were able to talk, but Kenny refused to give up his inheritance. Thinking inheritance equals becoming a billionaire is a dead giveaway that he doesn't get it. An inheritance isn't just about positive assets. Some people inherit negative assets, like my father did. Having already taken possession of my father's money, Kenny couldn't back out of it now. I thought, soon enough, Kenny will be calling in anger. The next day, just as I expected, I received a furious call from Kenny. Now that we were strangers, I wasn't afraid of what he had to say. I answered the phone.
Hey, what's going on? This company keeps getting bills. Electricity? Gas? Why do we have to pay these when it's a company?
I let out a big sigh at Kenny's childish comments, which made him sound neither like a business owner nor an adult. Will you pay for electricity and gas when you use them? It's simple, right? You can't just refuse to pay for those things because it's a company. How did someone like Kenny think he could inherit my father's company? Compared to the many bills that would inevitably come, electricity and gas bills were still the smaller issue. Kenny, who probably hasn't considered how much it costs to run a business, would definitely face financial troubles in the future. With the debts my father left behind, he has no idea what he's in for.
What's wrong with this company? There's no money coming in, just bills. Plus, everything's dirty. There are too many desks. Do something about it.
Well, if you don't clean, things get dirty. And the desks are probably leased, right? If you don't handle this properly, you'll get a lot of bills for the desk and computer leases. And wasn't it you who wanted my father's company? I heard you even went to visit my father while he was in the hospital to negotiate. And you brought your mistress and child along. Oh, is she your wife now? I had heard this from a nurse at the hospital. Kenny had visited my father with his mistress and child, asking him to leave the inheritance to him.
You think of me as your son, right? Look, I have a new child now. To make them happy, give me your company and assets.
Because of this, my father decided to leave the inheritance to Kenny. He was determined to confront the disgraceful man who brought his mistress and secret child to his father-in-law. Surely, he was doing it for my sake. If Kenny had even a little sense, he would have renounced the inheritance. But he was nothing but a fool, so he gladly accepted it. And, of course, Kenny was the latter. If you had listened to people, this wouldn't have happened, I said, and Kenny immediately responded in his usual tone.
What? I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not paying a dime. I'll crush this company.
I couldn't stand hearing Kenny shouting on the other end of the phone, so I quickly pulled the phone away from my ear. I didn't want to hear his voice anymore. I'm no longer involved, so do whatever you want, I said, ending the call. Less than a month later, Kenny called me again, but I ignored it for a while. I could pretty much guess what he wanted, and more than anything, I didn't want to get involved with him. When Kenny is doing well, he never contacts me. But as soon as he runs out of money or faces some difficulty, he calls. If we were still married, I could understand. But after the divorce, I have no interest in helping Kenny. But the calls from Kenny didn't stop. Reluctantly, I answered, and his shouting voice rang through the phone.
What did you do? The house is messed up. Some stranger is living there.
Kenny must have gone back to the house we once lived in. He was probably shocked when he saw unfamiliar people living there and called me about it. Yes, that house was sold. So, the new owners must be living there now. After Kenny claimed he was going on a business transfer and moved out, I did some digging, and it turned out his story about transferring for work was a complete lie. I had suspected as much, but he had pretended to go on a transfer to live with his mistress. It was such a childish and naive plan. It made me sick. Since Kenny moved out, I hadn't been giving him money. Probably because my father's condition worsened sooner than expected. Kenny might have gone to visit my father's hospital room to ask him for money. Because my father kindly gave Kenny money, Kenny didn't ask me for any. But it's ironic that the money my father gave Kenny became part of his debts later. I can only think serves him right.
What do you mean you sold the house? That house was mine, right? Since it belonged to your family, I should have inherited it. What are you doing messing with it? This is ridiculous.
It's almost impressive that Kenny still thinks there are positive assets left at this point. I explained the situation to Kenny. You must have thought my family was rich and got close to me for that reason, right? Sure, the house was big, and there was money, but that was my mother's inheritance from her grandmother. So, my father wasn't really involved. Kenny's eyes widened and his eyebrows furrowed. He probably thought that if he got close to my father, he would inherit a large fortune. Also, the house was in my mother's name, so whether it's sold or whatever, that's our decision. Someone who made a mistress and left doesn't get to come back. Kenny muttered softly, I've been deceived. No one deceived you. You didn't listen to anyone. You even left proof of it yourself. In fact, Kenny had copied the footage he recorded and distributed it to all my relatives, so there was no escaping or hiding from it. So, even if you delete the original data, it's useless. The records and evidence of you shouting, I'm getting the inheritance, in court are still there. On the other end of the phone, I could hear Kenny groaning in frustration. I didn't want to talk to him anymore, but he clearly wasn't ready to accept what was happening.
You're at your family's house with that kid, right? That big, shabby place. I'll come over and destroy it, so get ready.
With those words, Kenny hung up. It seemed like more trouble was coming my way. Well, I guess I should hide anything that could get damaged. I prepared myself for Kenny's upcoming visit. The following week, as he had said, Kenny arrived at my family's house. To be exact, he brought his current wife, who had once been his mistress, and the child along to the property where my family lived. In the photo Kenny sent me, the child looked like a baby, but the child he brought along was clearly over 5 years old. If this child really was Kenny's, it meant he had been involved with her for over 5 years. Kenny truly is a man who loves providing evidence of his own actions. In a way, he's a very useful person. Kenny stood frozen in front of the property, eyes wide with surprise. When we were married, he often mocked the age of my family's house, saying things like,
It's big, but it's falling apart. If an earthquake hits, it's going down.
But now, the old house had become a storage area, and a new, large house had been built on the same property. My mother wanted to enjoy her later years, so she built a new house for $1 million. Since it's in the countryside, $1 million is enough to build an impressively large house. Kenny was taken aback by the newly renovated house. "Well, you really came, huh? Matching outfits. Nice to meet you. I'm Rachel, Kenny's ex-wife." I greeted them, but Kenny's mistress refused to introduce herself. She probably didn't want to reveal much about herself, but I already knew who she was. I decided not to push for her name and let it slide for now. I led Kenny and his family to the living room, and Tom invited Kenny's child to play.
Let's go play over there.
Tom grabbed the child's hand and led him to the back room. While the children played, the adults decided to talk. "So what's the reason for your visit today?" I asked, perhaps with a slight sense of superiority, and Kenny visibly scowled. Now that he isn't my husband, he doesn't have the right to look at me like that. Kenny, still in his usual tough tone, responded,
I heard from someone. After a divorce, the property gets split in half. So half of your assets are mine now, right?
So here we were, talking about asset division. I don't know who told him this, but they should have made sure to explain it correctly. Or maybe Kenny only listened to the parts that suited him.
I almost didn't realize I was missing out. You didn't tell me, did you? You're a sneak. Now you live in this big house, so half of it is mine, right?
In the room, besides Kenny and his wife, my mother and I were present. My mother sighed as she listened to Kenny's claims. Asset division, huh? Kenny, do you know what counts as part of asset division? It's the shared assets that were formed and maintained during the marriage. Savings, insurance, cars, and real estate that were accumulated together are usually included. I gave him a very basic explanation, but Kenny seemed confused, tilting his head. Hey, have you ever contributed any money to the household in the 12 years we were married? All the living expenses were covered by the money I earned, so there was no way to save up. Kenny furrowed his brow and retorted,
Oh yeah? I know you have a ton of savings. I'm telling you, give me half of that money.
How he knew I had savings is a mystery, but unfortunately, that money is not for him. That money was saved before I met you, during my single years. It's not money I saved after marrying you, so it's not part of the asset division. If you're going to speak so confidently, you should have done your homework first. Kenny glared at me with an obviously annoyed expression. I'm sure he had high hopes when he heard about asset division. But all the cars, furniture, and everything else were things I bought during my single years. There's nothing for Kenny to divide. There was a long silence, but eventually, Kenny's mistress spoke up.
I can't argue with you, Rachel, given my position. But desperate times call for desperate measures. Could you please lend us some money?
She begged me. Kenny, standing beside her, looked shocked and started yelling.
Hey, what are you doing? There's no need to beg these sneaky people. You don't need them for money.
Despite his outburst, she was desperate. I could faintly hear her saying, please. Kenny is still yelling for her to stop.
You stay quiet. I have to take care of that kid. You say you can manage, but you never have. This is the only way.
Tears streamed down her face as she begged. She, too, must have gone through hardship being with Kenny. She probably felt guilty about the affair, too. As a mother with a child of my own, I could empathize with her feelings. But that was a life she chose for herself. She probably dreamt of becoming the CEO's wife, having been sweet-talked by Kenny. I understood she was in a desperate situation, having to beg Kenny's ex-wife. But I didn't have any sympathy for her. I'm sorry, but I don't have any money to lend you. If anything, I'm the one who'll be collecting money from you. I'm going to demand alimony from both you and Kenny. She looked at me in disbelief. She must have thought I was a demon or a monster in that moment. You can think whatever you want about me, but don't give me that victim face. I stared at her. She looked like she was almost trembling. At the very least, you made your own choice to be with Kenny, didn't you? You thought you'd become the CEO's wife. So you had a child with him, right? How about asking your own family for help? Don't rely on a total stranger like me. She answered through her tears in response to my words.
My family, we don't get along too well.
What did that even mean? I continued. With all due respect, is there anyone more difficult for you to get along with than me? You're here begging me now, aren't you? Then you should absolutely be able to ask your family for help. What she needed to think about was her child's future. It's truly pointless to involve children in adult struggles. Please protect your child, I said, and she immediately covered her face with her hands, crying harder. Kenny looked on as if it had nothing to do with him. He truly was a hopeless man. Kenny, you said I deceived you, but you're the one who deceived me. My father and I, we all got deceived. There was never any love in our marriage from the start. It's sad, but true. I looked at Kenny, but not once did our eyes meet. For 12 years, he had avoided looking me in the eye like this. If there's one thing I could thank you for, it's that you brought me Tom. That's really it. You will never see Tom again. I want you to regret that for the rest of your life. At that moment, Tom appeared from the back room. I wondered what Kenny was thinking, watching Tom now. Tom probably felt no emotions at all toward Kenny. He hadn't spent enough time with him to feel anything. Tom walked back to the room without showing any emotion. This was likely the last time Kenny would see Tom. It seemed that Kenny realized this. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he began sobbing uncontrollably. Regret doesn't come first. Most of the time, you realize what's truly important too late. How happy Kenny might have been if things had stayed the way they were. Just admiration, just beautiful memories. There's no point in speculating about what ifs. So, I decided to sever ties with Kenny. Goodbye, Kenny. The dazzling light I once admired had faded, and now he was just someone crying, shaking.
I see. You've divorced, huh? I'm sorry.
I had tea with Mary, a friend from high school, after a long time. By the time everything had settled down and I had some breathing room, it was time to meet her. The reunion where I reconnected with Kenny was one that Mary had organized at Kenny's request. According to Mary, Kenny wanted to meet me. Back in high school, Kenny knew my family was wealthy, and since he needed money, he probably set up the reunion to get closer to me. I suspect that Mary knew Kenny's intentions. That's probably why she reached out to me regularly, concerned about me. She must have felt guilty, knowing that I could get deceived by Kenny. It's not your fault, Mary. I married Kenny because I chose to. It's our problem that we're getting a divorce, so don't worry about it. When I said this, Mary seemed relieved. Really, it wasn't her fault. It was between Kenny and me. Afterward, I filed for alimony from both Kenny and his mistress. Upon investigation, I found out that they had been involved for more than 6 years. Half of our marriage was spent with Kenny cheating. I feel incredibly foolish for not noticing it earlier. According to the lawyer, the mistress had asked her family for help. It turned out that she was allowed to stay with her family on the condition that she broke up with Kenny. She left Kenny and returned to her family for the sake of her child. Additionally, Kenny's parents, whom I hadn't been allowed to meet in the past 12 years, had actually been estranged from him for a long time due to his bad behavior in his youth. Apparently, after this issue, they were contacted, but they said, "We have no relationship with our son anymore." Kenny was completely turned away. In the end, Kenny was left with a negative inheritance from his father, and he ended up bankrupting the company. He only had the option of filing for personal bankruptcy, but my mother stopped that from happening. My mother took responsibility for paying off the debt my father had left behind. When I asked her why, she said,
If he files for bankruptcy, he'll be exempt from paying the alimony he owes you. He hurt my precious Rachel and Tom, so I want him to pay alimony and feel the weight of his sins.
At that moment, I truly felt the depth of my mother's love. Just as my mother protected me, I had to protect Tom. "Hey, Mary, why don't you come visit us sometime? I think Tom would really enjoy it." Mary smiled and said, "I'll definitely come soon." Thinking about it, I realized that it was thanks to Mary that I was able to meet Tom. I couldn't help but feel grateful to her. On a beautiful spring day, Tom started middle school. "Your uniform looks great. You've even grown taller than me."
Mom, stop getting all sentimental. Let's take a picture together.
Tom said, pulling me under the cherry blossom tree. His shoulder was now much higher than mine. "Hey, Tom, when you're in high school and when you go to college, will you still take pictures with me in spring?" I casually asked him. It's both a joy and a sadness watching your child grow up. But I want to have memories together, even if it's just occasionally. Tom gave me the same smile as before and said,
Of course. Even if I get a girlfriend, get married, and have kids, we'll still take pictures together.
Under the soft spring sun, we both flashed a big peace sign for the camera.